Introduction. Human judgment is formed less by what is said than by how it is said. In professional environments, classrooms, interviews, meetings, and even casual discussions, people rarely analyze intelligence directly. Instead, they infer it. These inferences are built on subtle cues, the structure of sentences, the choice of words, the rhythm of speech, and the speaker's ability to express ideas without unnecessary effort or confusion. This explains a common paradox. Individuals with deep knowledge often struggle to be taken seriously, while others with modest understanding appear insightful and capable. The difference does not lie in intelligence itself, but in communication discipline. Speaking smart is not synonymous with speaking eloquently. It is not about vocabulary inflation, accent imitation, or theatrical delivery. In many cases, excessive eloquence weakens credibility. Intelligent communication is defined by clarity, restraint, and precision. The modern communication environment makes this skill increasingly important. Conversations are shorter, attention spans are limited, and listeners are less patient with disorganized speech. In such conditions, the ability to express complex ideas simply and accurately becomes a decisive advantage. This book does not attempt to turn the listener into a performer or a motivational speaker. Its purpose is more practical and more demanding, to develop a reliable method for speaking in a way that reflects clear thinking and earns trust. The framework presented in this audiobook is based on 3 core principles. Speech reflects thought structure. Listeners evaluate intelligence unconsciously. Precision is more persuasive than volume. Throughout this book, you will learn how to organize thoughts before speaking, eliminate verbal habits that reduce credibility, choose words that carry authority without aggression, control pace and silence effectively, communicate ideas in a way that is both efficient and respected. Each chapter builds logically on the previous one. The goal is not inspiration, but consistency. Intelligent speech should not appear occasionally, it should become habitual. By the end of this audiobook, speaking smart will no longer feel like an effort. It will feel like the natural outcome of disciplined thinking and deliberate expression. When speech appears scattered, listeners assume the thinking behind it is scattered as well. When speech is controlled and economical, listeners infer clarity and competence, even before evaluating the content itself. This relationship between thought and speech is fundamental. Attempts to improve communication that focus only on surface techniques, such as memorized phrases or presentation tricks, inevitably fail. Sustainable improvement begins at a deeper level. Most people speak while thinking. This habit is responsible for many weaknesses, commonly associated with unpolished communication, long sentences that lose direction, unnecessary repetition, filler words, and sudden shifts in topic. These are not speaking problems, they are thinking problems expressed out loud. Smart speakers reverse this process. They think before speaking, even if only for a brief moment. That pause allows them to select intent, structure, and relevance. The first element is intent. Before speaking, a smart communicator determines exactly what outcome is desired. Is the goal to inform, to clarify, to persuade, or to respond? Without a defined intent, speech becomes exploratory and inefficient, forcing the listener to guess what the speaker is trying to achieve. The second element is structure. Ideas must be arranged in a logical order. This does not require formal outlines or complex planning. It requires deciding what comes first, what supports it, and what can be omitted. Listeners process information sequentially. When ideas arrive in the wrong order, comprehension suffers, regardless of intelligence. The third element is relevance. Intelligent speech respects the listener's time. Every additional word carries a cost. Smart speakers remove anything that does not directly serve the main point. This discipline creates a noticeable difference in how speech is received. Brevity, when paired with clarity, increases authority. An important misconception must be addressed here. Speaking smart does not mean speaking less in all situations. It means speaking only what is necessary. In some contexts, this results in short responses. In others, it requires detailed explanation. The difference lies in control, not length. Another defining trait of intelligent speakers is their relationship with silence. Silence is not treated as a failure or a sign of weakness. It is treated as a tool. Pauses signal deliberation. They give weight to words and allow listeners to process information. When used intentionally, silence increases perceived confidence and credibility. Many people rush their speech out of fear of appearing unsure, fear of losing attention, or fear of being interrupted. Ironically, this behavior produces the very impression they are trying to avoid. Rushed speech communicates uncertainty even when the message is accurate. Intelligent communication favors calm over speed. This chapter establishes a central principle that will guide the rest of the book. To speak smart, one must first think in a structured and economical way. In the next chapter, we will examine how listeners unconsciously judge intelligence and credibility, and why small adjustments in delivery often matter more than content itself. Chapter 2. How listeners judge intelligence. Without realizing it, human beings do not evaluate intelligence in the way they believe they do. Most people assume that intelligence is recognized through logic, evidence, or depth of knowledge. In practice, intelligence is inferred through surface signals long before any careful evaluation takes place. These signals are subtle, automatic, and largely unconscious. They shape how a speaker is perceived within moments of beginning to speak. When a person starts talking, listeners are not waiting patiently to analyze ideas. They are instantly forming impressions. These impressions are not deliberate judgments. They are rapid mental shortcuts that help the brain decide how much attention and trust to allocate. Once these judgments are formed, they strongly influence everything that follows. A speaker perceived as intelligent will be given the benefit of the doubt. A speaker perceived as unclear or unsure will be scrutinized more harshly, even if the content is identical. This process explains why communication skill often outweighs knowledge in real-world settings. It also explains why many intelligent individuals feel misunderstood or underestimated. The issue is rarely a lack of intelligence. It is a failure to align speech patterns with how the human mind evaluates credibility. Listeners rely heavily on cognitive efficiency. The brain prefers information that is easy to process. When speech flows smoothly, when ideas are well organized, and when sentences arrive in a logical sequence, the brain experiences less effort. This ease is then misattributed to intelligence. Conversely, when speech is disorganized, repetitive, or unnecessarily complex, the brain experiences friction. That friction is interpreted as confusion or lack of competence on the part of the speaker. This phenomenon occurs regardless of the listener's education level. Even experts are influenced by it. In professional meetings, academic discussions, and interviews, the same principle applies. People may later justify their impressions using rational explanations, but the initial judgment is almost always intuitive. One of the most powerful factors shaping perceived intelligence is clarity. Clarity signals control. It suggests that the speaker understands not only the subject, but also the listener's perspective. Clear speech creates a sense of direction. The listener knows where the speaker is going and why. This sense of direction reduces cognitive effort and increases trust. Lack of clarity has the opposite effect. When a speaker jumps between ideas, adds unnecessary detail, or struggles to articulate a point, listeners begin to disengage. They may still appear attentive, but internally they are working harder to follow. That effort weakens the speaker's authority. Over time, listeners stop trying. They either interrupt, change the subject, or silently disengage. Another critical factor is composure. Intelligence is strongly associated with emotional regulation. Speakers who appear calm, measured, and deliberate are perceived as more intelligent than those who appear rushed, defensive, or reactive. This does not mean emotion should be eliminated from speech. It means emotion should be controlled rather than expressed impulsively. When a speaker reacts immediately, fills every silence, or speaks at excessive speed, it signals a lack of internal control. Listeners may interpret this as nervousness, insecurity, or lack of preparation. Even when the content is accurate, the delivery undermines credibility. Pauses play a crucial role in this process. Silence, when used intentionally, signals confidence and deliberation. It suggests that the speaker is choosing words carefully rather than grasping for them. Many people fear silence because they associate it with uncertainty. In reality, silence often communicates the opposite. It gives weight to speech and allows listeners to absorb information. Word choice also shapes perceived intelligence, but not in the way most people expect. Using complex vocabulary does not automatically increase credibility. In many cases, it reduces it. Overly technical or obscure language forces listeners to work harder, which increases cognitive load. As that load increases, trust decreases. Smart speakers prioritize precision over complexity. They choose words that are exact rather than impressive. They avoid vague abstractions and favor concrete language when possible. When technical terms are necessary, they introduce them carefully and ensure they are clearly defined through context. Sentence structure matters as much as vocabulary. Long, winding sentences increase the likelihood of confusion. They force listeners to hold multiple ideas in memory at once. Shorter, well-constructed sentences reduce that burden. This does not mean all sentences should be short. Variation is important. However, each sentence should serve a clear purpose. Listeners also respond strongly to coherence. Coherence refers to how well ideas connect to one another. Smart speakers make these connections explicit. They guide the listener through the logic rather than assuming it will be inferred. Simple transitions, clear references, and consistent framing all contribute to coherence. Another subtle but powerful factor is consistency. Inconsistent speech patterns weaken perceived intelligence. This includes inconsistency in tone, pace, or position. When a speaker frequently contradicts themselves, qualifies every statement, or shifts their stance mid-sentence, listeners become uncertain. That uncertainty is attributed to the speaker rather than the complexity of the topic. Confidence, in the context of intelligent speech, is not loudness or dominance. It is stability. Stable tone, stable pacing, and stable positioning create a sense of reliability. Speakers who constantly hedge, apologize, or seek validation undermine their own authority, even when their ideas are sound. Listeners are also sensitive to relevance. They want to know why something is being said. When a speaker includes information that does not clearly support the main point, listeners begin to question judgment. Over time, irrelevant detail erodes credibility. Smart speakers demonstrate respect for the listener's attention by removing anything that does not directly contribute. One of the most damaging habits in communication is over-explanation. Many speakers believe that adding more detail will make them sound thorough. In reality, excessive explanation often signals insecurity. It suggests that the speaker does not trust their own point to stand on its own. Listeners interpret this as weakness. Intelligent speakers explain enough, then stop. They allow silence to do some of the work. They trust the listener's ability to understand. Another factor shaping perceived intelligence is responsiveness. How a speaker responds to questions, interruptions, or challenges reveals more than prepared speech ever could. Speakers who remain composed, listen fully, and respond directly are perceived as more intelligent than those who become defensive or evasive. It is important to note that none of these factors require innate talent. They are not personality traits. They are learned behaviors. People who appear naturally articulate have usually internalized these patterns through experience, training, or deliberate practice. This chapter highlights an uncomfortable truth. Intelligence alone is not enough. If intelligence is not communicated in a way that aligns with how people evaluate speech, it remains invisible. Speaking smart is not about manipulation. It is about reducing distortion. It allows ideas to be evaluated on their merit rather than dismissed due to poor delivery. As you continue through this book, you will learn how to apply these principles deliberately. You will learn how to structure speech so that clarity becomes automatic, how to regulate pace and tone, and how to choose words that reflect disciplined thinking. In the next chapter, we will move deeper into the internal process of speaking smart. We will examine how to organize thoughts before speaking and how to develop mental frameworks that make intelligent speech consistent rather than occasional. Chapter 3. Thinking before speaking, the internal discipline of smart communication. Intelligent speech does not begin with words. It begins with internal organization. Before a sentence is spoken, a series of mental processes either align or collide. When these processes are aligned, speech appears clear, deliberate, and confident. When they are not, speech becomes fragmented, hesitant, or unnecessarily complex. Most people underestimate how little time is actually required to think before speaking. They assume that clarity requires long reflection, when in reality it often requires only a brief pause and a specific type of mental ordering. The problem is not time, the problem is habit. Untrained speakers develop the habit of verbalizing thoughts as they occur. This creates the illusion of honesty and spontaneity, but it weakens communication. Raw thought is rarely structured. It contains contradictions, excess detail, and incomplete reasoning. When expressed directly, it places the burden of organization on the listener. Smart speakers do the opposite. They take responsibility for organization before speech occurs. This responsibility does not require perfection. It requires intention. At the core of intelligent speech lies a simple discipline, deciding what deserves to be spoken and what should remain internal. Not every thought needs to be expressed. In fact, most do not. Speaking smart involves filtering internal dialogue before it reaches the listener. The first internal discipline is defining the point. Before speaking, a smart communicator identifies the central idea in a single sentence, even if that sentence is never spoken aloud. This internal sentence acts as a reference point. Everything that follows either supports it or is discarded. Without this internal anchor, speech drifts. The speaker begins with one idea, adds another that feels related, then another that feels interesting, until the original point is lost. Listeners experience this as confusion, even if each individual statement is reasonable. Defining the point internally prevents this drift. It creates boundaries. It tells the speaker when to stop. The second internal discipline is sequencing. Once the point is defined, the speaker decides the order in which information should be presented. This decision is often unconscious in skilled communicators, but it can be trained consciously. Effective sequencing follows a basic logic: context first, claim second, explanation third. Context tells the listener why the topic matters. The claim tells them what is being asserted. The explanation tells them how or why. When this order is reversed, listeners struggle. They receive information before they understand its purpose. Many speakers fail not because their ideas are weak, but because their sequencing is reversed. They begin with detail before establishing relevance. They explain before making a claim. Listeners are left guessing what the speaker is trying to say. Smart speakers remove that guesswork. The third internal discipline is compression. Compression does not mean oversimplification. It means expressing an idea using the fewest words necessary to preserve accuracy. This requires judgment. It also requires confidence. Unconfident speakers expand. They add qualifiers, examples, and explanations out of fear that their point will be misunderstood or challenged. Confident speakers compress. They state the idea cleanly and allow it to stand. Compression increases perceived intelligence because it signals mastery. When someone can express a complex idea simply, listeners assume deep understanding. When someone struggles to summarize, listeners assume uncertainty. Compression also improves listening. Shorter, well-structured statements are easier to process and remember. They leave mental space for reflection rather than confusion. Another critical internal factor is emotional regulation. Emotions influence speech more than most people realize. Anxiety accelerates pace. Defensiveness increases volume. Excitement reduces precision. None of these effects are inherently negative, but when unmanaged, they distort communication. Smart speakers monitor their emotional state before and during speech. This does not mean suppressing emotion. It means preventing emotion from controlling structure. An emotionally charged message can still be delivered with clarity if the speaker maintains internal discipline. One of the most effective tools for emotional regulation is the pause. A pause creates distance between stimulus and response. It allows the speaker to regain control over pacing and tone. It also signals composure to the listener. Many people fear pauses because they associate them with uncertainty or weakness. In reality, pauses are interpreted as thoughtfulness when used deliberately. A brief pause before responding to a question often increases perceived intelligence more than an immediate answer. Internal discipline also involves resisting the urge to speak immediately. In conversations, especially fast-paced ones, there is pressure to respond quickly. Speed is often mistaken for intelligence. In reality, speed without clarity weakens credibility. Smart speakers are comfortable allowing a moment of silence. They use that moment to organize their response. This habit alone can dramatically change how speech is perceived. Another aspect of thinking before speaking is anticipating the listener's perspective. Intelligent communication is listener-centered. It considers what the listener already knows, what they care about, and what they need to understand next. Speakers who ignore the listener's perspective often provide too much or too little information. They either overwhelm with detail or omit necessary context. Both errors reduce clarity. Smart speakers constantly adjust. They read cues. They notice confusion or disengagement and adapt accordingly. This adaptability is not improvisation. It is applied awareness. Mental clutter is another obstacle to intelligent speech. Mental clutter includes unrelated thoughts, emotional residue from previous conversations, and internal distractions. When mental clutter is high, speech quality declines. Developing the habit of clearing mental clutter before important conversations improves communication significantly. This does not require meditation or complex techniques. It requires brief, intentional focus. Asking a simple internal question such as, "What am I actually trying to say?" can be enough to reset attention. Another important internal skill is tolerance for incompleteness. Many speakers feel uncomfortable leaving ideas partially unstated. They attempt to cover every angle, anticipate every objection, and explain every implication. This results in bloated speech. Smart speakers accept that not everything needs to be said at once. They allow conversations to unfold. They trust that clarification can occur if needed. This restraint improves clarity and reduces cognitive load on the listener. Internal discipline also includes recognizing when not to speak. Silence is not absence. It is a communicative choice. Choosing not to speak can preserve credibility when a contribution would add little value. People who speak less but speak well are often perceived as more intelligent than those who speak frequently without discipline. This perception is not accidental. It reflects the listener's experience of value. Developing this internal discipline requires practice. It requires noticing habitual patterns and interrupting them. It requires patience. At first, thinking before speaking may feel unnatural or slow. Over time, it becomes automatic. The goal is not perfection. The goal is consistency. Intelligent speech does not mean never misspeaking. It means recovering quickly and maintaining overall clarity. This chapter emphasizes a central idea that will recur throughout this book. Speaking smart is primarily an internal skill. External techniques matter, but they are secondary. Without internal organization, no amount of vocal training or rhetorical strategy will produce reliable results. As you continue, you will learn how to translate this internal discipline into external expression. The next chapter will focus on words themselves, how specific word choices shape perception, credibility, and authority, and how to develop a vocabulary that reflects intelligence without sounding artificial. Chapter 4. Words, Precision, and the Illusion of Intelligence. Words are the most visible surface of thought. They are also the most misunderstood element of intelligent speech. Many people believe that speaking smart requires advanced vocabulary, rare expressions, or technical terminology. This belief is responsible for a large proportion of ineffective communication. It replaces clarity with decoration and precision with performance. In reality, intelligent speech is not defined by the rarity of words, but by their accuracy. The purpose of words is not to impress, but to transmit meaning with minimal distortion. When words are chosen carefully, they disappear. The listener does not notice the language, they notice the idea. Most speaking problems related to vocabulary arise from one fundamental mistake: selecting words based on how they sound rather than what they do. Words are tools. Each word performs a specific function. When the wrong tool is used, the structure weakens. Smart speakers treat words functionally. They ask not whether a word sounds intelligent, but whether it expresses the idea more clearly than any alternative. This approach immediately changes how speech is perceived. One of the strongest indicators of intelligent word use is specificity. Vague language weakens credibility. Words such as things, stuff, kind of, and basically signal imprecision. They suggest that the speaker has not fully clarified their own thinking. Listeners interpret this as uncertainty or lack of depth. Specific words, on the other hand, signal control. They show that the speaker has taken the time to define the idea internally. This does not require complex language. Often, the most specific word is also the simplest. For example, saying, "This approach is ineffective," is clearer and more intelligent than saying, "This approach is not really that good." Using multiple words interchangeably when they do not mean the same thing creates confusion. Many speakers do this unintentionally. They shift between terms without realizing that each carries different implications. Smart speakers choose a word and stay with it. This consistency stabilizes meaning. It allows listeners to build understanding without constantly adjusting their interpretation. In professional contexts, this stability is often mistaken for intelligence when it is actually discipline. Economy of language is equally important. Intelligent speech avoids redundancy. Redundancy does not reinforce clarity, it dilutes it. When the same idea is repeated using slightly different words, listeners assume the speaker is unsure or attempting to fill space. This does not mean repetition should never be used. Strategic repetition can emphasize a point. However, unintentional repetition, especially within the same sentence, weakens perceived intelligence. Another common issue is overqualification. Words such as maybe, perhaps, I think, and in my opinion are sometimes necessary, but they are frequently overused. Excessive qualification makes speech sound tentative. Listeners begin to doubt the speaker's confidence even when the content is reasonable. Smart speakers qualify only when accuracy requires it. They do not hedge reflexively. They understand that certainty, when appropriate, builds credibility. At the same time, intelligent speakers avoid absolute language when it is not justified. Words such as always, never, and everyone create vulnerability. Listeners instinctively search for exceptions. When exceptions are found, trust erodes. Precision lies in balance. Intelligent speech avoids both excessive hedging and unjustified certainty. It reflects an accurate assessment of reality rather than an attempt to appear confident. Word choice also influences tone. Tone is not only a function of voice, it is embedded in language itself. Certain words carry emotional weight, others carry neutrality. Smart speakers are aware of these effects and choose accordingly. Emotionally loaded words can be powerful, but they can also distort meaning. When overused, they reduce analytical clarity. In serious communication, neutral language often increases credibility by allowing ideas to stand on their own. Another aspect of intelligent word use is alignment between language and context. Words that sound appropriate in casual conversation may sound careless in professional settings. Conversely, overly formal language can sound artificial in informal contexts. Smart speakers adjust vocabulary to the situation without changing their underlying clarity. This adaptability is a sign of communicative intelligence. It shows awareness of audience and purpose. Metaphors and analogies deserve special attention. When used well, they clarify complex ideas. When used poorly, they confuse. Intelligent speakers use metaphors sparingly and deliberately. They choose analogies that illuminate rather than decorate. Overextended metaphors are particularly damaging. When a metaphor is pushed beyond its natural limits, it introduces inaccuracies. Listeners may focus on the metaphor rather than the idea, reducing clarity. Another subtle but important factor is sentence framing. The way a sentence begins influences how it is interpreted. Beginning with uncertainty often frames the entire statement as tentative, even if the conclusion is strong. For example, starting a sentence with "I'm not sure," but immediately lowers perceived confidence. Even if the idea that follows is sound, the framing weakens it. Smart speakers are aware of this effect and choose openings carefully. Active language also increases perceived intelligence. Passive constructions can be useful, but overuse makes speech sound indirect. Active language clarifies responsibility and action. It creates momentum. Consider the difference between mistakes were made and we made mistakes. The second statement is clearer, more direct, and more credible. Intelligent speech favors this clarity. Another important consideration is verbal filler. Words such as like, and you know interrupt flow. Occasional fillers are natural. Persistent fillers indicate lack of internal organization. They signal that the speaker is searching for words in real time. Reducing fillers requires slowing down. Speed increases filler frequency, pausing reduces it. Smart speakers replace fillers with silence. Silence feels uncomfortable at first, but it quickly becomes a marker of confidence. Vocabulary expansion should be approached carefully. Learning new words can be useful, but only if those words are integrated naturally and accurately. Misused vocabulary damages credibility more than simple language ever could. Intelligent speakers prefer mastery of common words over superficial knowledge of rare ones. They understand nuances. They know when a word slightly shifts meaning and choose accordingly. Another overlooked aspect of word use is alignment between spoken and internal language. Many people think clearly internally but translate poorly into speech. This gap creates frustration. Closing it requires practice in articulating thoughts verbally, not just mentally. Reading high-quality non-fiction aloud can help, so can summarizing complex ideas in one's own words. These practices build verbal precision over time. The illusion of intelligence created by word choice is not deception. It is alignment. When words accurately reflect thought, listeners perceive intelligence naturally. When words obscure thought, intelligence appears absent. This chapter reinforces a central theme. Speaking smart is about reducing distortion. Every unnecessary word, vague phrase, or misused term introduces noise. Intelligent speech minimizes noise. As you progress, you'll begin to notice your own patterns. This awareness is the first step toward refinement. Word choice becomes deliberate, sentences become cleaner. Listeners respond differently. In the next chapter, we will move beyond words and examine vocal delivery. Tone, pace, and rhythm shape how words are received. Even perfectly chosen language can fail if delivery undermines it. Intelligent speech requires alignment between what is said and how it is expressed. Chapter 5: Voice, Pace, and the Authority. You communicate without words. Speech is never evaluated on language alone. Long before a listener processes the meaning of words, they process sound. The human voice carries information that bypasses conscious analysis and directly influences judgment. Tone, pace, rhythm, and volume operate beneath awareness, shaping how intelligence, confidence, and credibility are perceived. This is why two people can say the same sentence and receive entirely different reactions. The difference lies not in vocabulary, but in delivery. Intelligent communication requires alignment between language and vocal expression. When these elements conflict, the voice usually overrides the words. Most people underestimate the role of vocal control because they assume it is innate. They believe some people are natural speakers and others are not. In reality, vocal habits are learned, behaviors shaped by environment, emotion, and repetition. Like any behavior, they can be refined. One of the most influential vocal variables is pace. Speaking too quickly is one of the most common causes of reduced credibility. Rapid speech creates the impression of nervousness or urgency, even when none is intended. It signals that the speaker is trying to push information rather than guide understanding. Fast speech also increases cognitive load on the listener. When information arrives too quickly, the listener must work harder to keep up. This effort is unconsciously attributed to the speaker. Over time, Listeners disengage or miss key points. Speaking too slowly, however, introduces a different problem. Excessively slow speech can sound artificial or patronizing. It may signal uncertainty or lack of confidence. Intelligent pace lies between these extremes. It adjusts based on complexity, context, and listener response. Smart speakers vary their pace intentionally. They slow down for important points and speed up through familiar or less critical material. This variation creates rhythm and holds attention. Monotone pacing, whether fast or slow, reduces engagement. Pauses are an essential part of pacing. Silence is not empty space, it is structural support. A pause allows meaning to settle. It gives the listener time to process and signals that what was said matters. Many speakers fear pauses because silence feels exposed. They worry that listeners will interpret silence as incompetence. In reality, controlled pauses often increase perceived intelligence. They suggest deliberation and confidence. Pauses also improve articulation. When speakers slow down and pause between thoughts, words become clearer. Sentences are completed rather than abandoned. Fillers naturally decrease. Tone is another powerful factor. Tone conveys attitude. It communicates whether a speaker is confident, defensive, curious, or dismissive. Listeners are highly sensitive to tone changes, even when they cannot articulate them. A flat tone can make intelligent ideas sound dull or disengaged. An overly animated tone can make serious ideas sound unserious. Intelligent tone is balanced. It reflects interest without exaggeration and seriousness without stiffness. Tone is influenced by emotional state. Anxiety raises pitch. Defensiveness sharpens tone. Excitement increases variability. Smart speakers develop awareness of these patterns and regulate them consciously. Lower pitch is often associated with authority and confidence, but artificially lowering one's voice can sound unnatural. Intelligent vocal control does not involve imitation. It involves relaxation. When tension decreases, pitch naturally stabilizes. Breathing plays a critical role here. Shallow breathing increases tension and destabilizes voice. Deeper, controlled breathing supports steadier tone and smoother pacing. This is not a theatrical technique, it is physiological regulation. Volume also influences perception. Speaking too softly can signal uncertainty or lack of conviction. Speaking too loudly can signal aggression or insecurity. Intelligent speakers adjust volume to environment and content. Volume should support meaning, not replace it. Emphasizing key points with slight increases in volume can be effective. Constant loudness desensitizes listeners. Another important aspect of vocal delivery is articulation. Clear articulation improves comprehension and reduces listener effort. Slurred or rushed speech forces listeners to decode rather than understand. Articulation improves naturally when pace slows and attention increases. Overemphasis on pronunciation can sound unnatural. The goal is clarity, not performance. Vocal variety contributes to engagement. Variation in pitch, pace, and emphasis keeps speech dynamic. However, variety should arise from meaning rather than habit. Random variation distracts. Meaning-driven variation reinforces understanding. Many speakers develop unconscious vocal habits that undermine credibility. Rising pitch at the end of statements, for example, can make assertions sound like questions. This pattern, often called uptalk, signals uncertainty even when the content is confident. Similarly, trailing off at the end of sentences reduces authority. It suggests hesitation or lack of commitment. Intelligent speakers complete sentences with intention. Another habit is excessive emphasis. Emphasizing too many words reduces the impact of emphasis itself. When everything is stressed, nothing stands out. Smart speakers choose emphasis selectively. Listening to oneself is an uncomfortable but valuable practice. Recording speech and reviewing it objectively reveals habits that are invisible in the moment. Many speakers are surprised by how they sound compared to how they believe they sound. Improving vocal delivery is not about creating a new persona. It is about removing interference. When tension, haste, and emotional noise are reduced, the voice becomes a clearer channel for thought. Authority in speech does not come from dominance. It comes from alignment. When voice, words, and intent align, listeners sense coherence. That coherence is interpreted as intelligence. Importantly, vocal authority is context-dependent. What sounds authoritative in a meeting may sound excessive in a personal conversation. Intelligent speakers adjust without losing clarity. This adaptability requires awareness. Awareness develops through observation and reflection. Paying attention to how others respond to your voice provides feedback. Confusion, interruption, or disengagement often indicate misalignment. The goal of vocal control is not perfection, it is reliability. Intelligent speakers are not flawless, they are consistent. Their speech can be trusted. As these vocal skills develop, speaking smart becomes less effortful. The voice supports the message rather than competing with it. Listeners respond with greater attention and respect. Chapter 6. Mastering Dialogue, Speaking Smart in Conversations. Speaking smart is not only about delivering prepared ideas, it is equally about navigating dialogue. Conversations, unlike monologues, are dynamic and unpredictable. They require immediate thought, adjustment, and careful listening. The skill of intelligent dialogue is distinct from the skill of structured speech. It involves the ability to respond in real time without compromising clarity, precision, or credibility. Many people fail in conversation because they underestimate the cognitive demands involved. In dialogue, one must simultaneously listen, interpret, evaluate, and respond. Most speakers prioritize response over comprehension, reacting impulsively rather than strategically. This reactive pattern often results in miscommunication, loss of authority, and the appearance of uncertainty. The first principle of intelligent dialogue is active listening. Listening is not merely the absence of speaking, it is an intentional process of understanding. Active listening involves focusing attention entirely on the speaker, noting both content and context. It requires filtering out internal distractions, preconceptions, and emotional reactions that might distort perception. A common error in dialogue is planning while listening. The speaker hears words but simultaneously constructs a response. This split attention reduces comprehension and increases the likelihood of misaligned replies. Intelligent speakers temporarily suspend planning, allowing full understanding before formulating a response. This pause may be brief fractions of a second, but it transforms the quality of communication. Another critical aspect of dialogue is maintaining alignment between intention and expression. In conversation, the stakes of misalignment are high because the speaker cannot fully control the listener's focus. Words, tone, and timing must reflect the intended message precisely. Even minor inconsistencies, such as a slight uptick in pitch or an unintentional filler word, can introduce doubt. Intelligent speakers are vigilant about this alignment and make micro-adjustments as needed. Timing is equally important. Interrupting another speaker rarely signals intelligence. It often signals urgency or impatience. Strategic pauses allow the conversation to flow naturally while giving the listener time to absorb ideas. When used effectively, silence is a tool for control. It signals deliberation and commands attention without aggression. Response strategy in dialogue is multifaceted. It begins with comprehension, continues with evaluation, and ends with articulation. Each phase must be executed with discipline. Missteps at any stage can compromise perceived intelligence. Comprehension requires listening without distortion. Evaluation requires distinguishing between essential and peripheral information. Articulation requires translating thought into precise language delivered at appropriate pace and tone. A hallmark of intelligent dialogue is adaptability. No two interactions are identical. Listeners vary in knowledge, temperament, and expectation. A speaker who rigidly applies a prepared script risks confusion or disengagement. Smart speakers adjust their approach based on subtle feedback, including body language, facial expression, and vocal cues. This adaptability is not improvisation, it is the application of disciplined principles to a fluid context. Clarifying questions are another tool of intelligent dialogue. They prevent assumptions and reveal the listener's perspective. Asking questions does not signal ignorance. When executed strategically, it signals attentiveness and analytical thinking. Smart speakers balance inquiry with contribution, ensuring that questions support the flow of conversation rather than interrupt it. Managing disagreement is a critical skill within dialogue. Intelligent speakers handle conflict by prioritizing clarity over persuasion, precision over volume, and composure over assertiveness. Aggressive or defensive reactions often undermine authority, regardless of the validity of the argument. Calm, structured responses that address points directly while maintaining respectful tone consistently increase perceived intelligence. Another common pitfall in dialogue is over-explaining. Many speakers, fearing misunderstanding, provide excessive detail. This approach burdens listeners cognitively and diminishes impact. Smart speakers summarize concisely, provide essential context, and offer elaboration only when requested or necessary. Strategic listening also involves monitoring one's own cognitive load. Dialogue requires mental multitasking, tracking the conversation, evaluating the response, and managing delivery. High cognitive load reduces clarity and increases verbal mistakes. Reducing unnecessary internal commentary, controlling emotion, and focusing on the central message are essential for maintaining effective dialogue. Non-verbal cues complement verbal communication. Gestures, posture, and facial expression influence perception even when unnoticed consciously. Intelligent speakers ensure that non-verbal signals reinforce rather than contradict words. This alignment enhances credibility and facilitates comprehension. Managing interruptions effectively is another dimension of intelligent dialogue. Interruptions are inevitable. Smart speakers respond with composure, addressing the interruption without losing structure. They acknowledge points briefly, integrate or refocus the discussion, and continue articulating their ideas with clarity. Reacting defensively to interruptions damages credibility and reduces perceived intelligence. Listening for patterns in conversation also aids strategic response. By observing recurring themes, points of interest, or misunderstandings, the speaker can tailor responses to maximize impact. This pattern recognition is subtle but powerful, often creating the impression of heightened insight. Maintaining thematic coherence throughout dialogue ensures that ideas are connected logically, even in dynamic contexts. Intelligent speakers prevent drift by linking statements back to central points. They summarize briefly when necessary to reinforce understanding. This practice prevents misinterpretation and strengthens perceived competence. Adaptive language selection remains critical in dialogue. Speakers adjust vocabulary, tone, and phrasing based on the listener's expertise, cultural context, and emotional state. Misalignment between language and audience reduces clarity and trust. Awareness of audience and adaptability is a core component of intelligent interaction. Confidence in dialogue derives from preparation, clarity, and composure rather than dominance. Speakers who project calm assurance are more likely to be trusted and understood. Excessive eagerness to contribute often appears reactive, undermining authority. Intelligent speakers allow space for reflection, respond thoughtfully, and assert points deliberately. Internal regulation underlies effective dialogue. Speakers must manage emotion, focus, and intention simultaneously. Emotional responses such as frustration, excitement, or impatience can distort content and delivery. Recognizing emotional triggers and moderating responses ensures consistent clarity and authority. Finally, intelligent dialogue includes selective speech. Not every thought needs to be verbalized. Judicious contribution strengthens impact, while excessive input weakens perception. Smart speakers prioritize value over volume, ensuring that each contribution reinforces clarity and authority. The culmination of these practices results in conversational intelligence. Dialogue becomes a vehicle for demonstrating understanding, credibility, and thoughtfulness. Listeners perceive intelligence not only through content, but through composure, clarity, precision, adaptability, and strategic listening. Speaking smart in dialogue requires continuous attention, disciplined internal processes, and deliberate practice. It is not a natural gift, it is a skill developed through awareness and repetition. As this chapter illustrates, intelligent conversation is the application of principles established in earlier chapters. Internal organization, precise word choice, controlled voice, and deliberate pacing, applied in a dynamic, interactive environment. Mastery of dialogue transforms communication from a monologue of prepared ideas into a two-way exchange, where intelligence is both demonstrated and recognized naturally. Chapter 7. The Strategic Power of Storytelling in Intelligent Speech. Storytelling is one of the most powerful tools in human communication, yet it is often misunderstood. Many people associate storytelling with entertainment or informal speech, overlooking its capacity to clarify complex ideas, anchor concepts in memory, and convey insight with authority. Intelligent storytelling is not about fiction, exaggeration, or theatricality. It is about structuring information in a way that engages, explains, and persuades while maintaining precision and credibility. At its core, storytelling organizes abstract thought into a sequential, relatable framework. The human brain is wired to understand narratives more easily than disconnected facts. When information is presented in a story-like format, listeners can process it in context, relate it to prior knowledge, and retain it for longer periods. This principle is why intelligent speakers often embed examples, analogies, and mini-narratives in their explanations. It is a tool for comprehension rather than decoration. A story begins with context. Providing context is not an indulgence, it establishes the framework through which the listener interprets subsequent details. Without context, even accurate statements may seem irrelevant or confusing. In intelligent speech, context is precise, concise, and directly linked to the central point. Superfluous background, digression, or speculation dilutes clarity and reduces the perceived intelligence of the speaker. Following context, a story requires a sequence that mirrors logical progression. Intelligent speakers avoid random order or unrelated tangents. They present events, concepts, or data points in a manner that naturally builds understanding. The listener should be able to anticipate, infer, and integrate each element without feeling lost. Sequence, in this sense, is not storytelling for entertainment. It is storytelling for comprehension. The third element is relevance. Every story included in intelligent communication must serve a purpose. Illustrative examples should clarify a point, demonstrate causality, or provide insight into complex reasoning. Stories told for entertainment alone, without reinforcing the main message, waste attention and risk undermining authority. Skilled communicators embed narrative strategically, ensuring that every story is functional. Narrative also leverages emotional resonance, but in measured doses. Emotions increase attention, retention, and engagement, yet excessive emotionality can overshadow content. Intelligent storytelling balances effect with accuracy, using emotion to illuminate ideas rather than manipulate the listener. The goal is comprehension and credibility, not dramatization. In professional contexts, storytelling often appears as case studies, historical examples, or analogical comparisons. Each serves the same function, converting abstract or complex ideas into something tangible. The principle of specificity is crucial here. Vague narratives do not clarify, they confuse. Effective stories include concrete details that support understanding without overwhelming the listener. Timing and pacing in storytelling are equally important. Just as with ordinary speech, rapid delivery reduces comprehension, while excessive slowness risks disengagement. Skilled communicators modulate pace according to the story's complexity, emphasizing critical points and allowing the listener to process information. Pauses are strategic. They punctuate narrative transitions, highlight key insights, and give space for reflection. Another critical aspect is integration. A story should never exist in isolation from the main message. It must be explicitly connected to the argument, principle, or insight the speaker intends to convey. Intelligent speakers frequently link narrative to key points, summarizing lessons or highlighting implications at the conclusion of a story. This practice ensures that listeners retain both the narrative and its meaning. The structure of a story within intelligent speech often mirrors the framework of problem, action, and result. Presenting a problem engages the listener's attention and frames the relevance. Describing the action demonstrates process, reasoning, or decision-making. Concluding with results illustrates consequences and reinforces the point. This sequence is not storytelling for flair, it is storytelling for clarity, retention, and authority. Strategic variation in narrative is another hallmark of intelligent speakers. Repeating the same type of example repeatedly reduces impact. Mixing analogies, case studies, and real-world illustrations maintains engagement while reinforcing understanding. Variation does not mean inconsistency. The underlying principle, point, or insight must remain constant while the narrative form changes. In dialogue, storytelling also functions as a tool for anticipation and influence. A well-chosen narrative can preempt objections, clarify misunderstandings, and provide intuitive reasoning that pure logic may struggle to convey. This is particularly useful when interacting with diverse audiences who vary in prior knowledge, cognitive styles, and attentional capacity. Stories bridge gaps between complex ideas and listener comprehension. Another essential element is economy of narrative. Stories must be concise, with no extraneous detail. Skilled communicators distill anecdotes to the essence, ensuring that only the elements supporting the core point remain. Overlong narratives, no matter how accurate or interesting, dilute focus and reduce perceived intelligence. The listener's cognitive resources are finite. Intelligent storytelling respects that limitation. Internal preparation enhances narrative effectiveness. Prior to speaking, the intelligent communicator identifies which stories are available, relevant, and appropriate for the context. This selection is deliberate. Random storytelling or relying solely on memory during speech often produces disorganized narratives that obscure meaning. Pre-selection ensures efficiency and authority. Additionally, the interplay between story and analytical explanation is critical. Narrative alone does not substitute for argument, it complements it. Intelligent speakers integrate stories with explicit reasoning, demonstrating causal relationships and highlighting generalizable principles. This combination enhances both comprehension and credibility, allowing the listener to see not only the story, but its broader application. Self-awareness during storytelling is also essential. Speakers must monitor listener engagement, comprehension, and responsiveness. Adjustments in pace, emphasis, or even content may be necessary in real time. Skilled communicators read facial expressions, posture, and subtle cues to ensure alignment between narrative and listener understanding. Misalignment diminishes impact and perceived intelligence. The ethical dimension of storytelling must not be overlooked. Accuracy, honesty, and transparency are fundamental. Stories that exaggerate, fabricate, or mislead may initially captivate, but they erode trust and credibility over time. Intelligent storytelling builds authority by reinforcing integrity, not compromising it for effect. Furthermore, storytelling can reinforce identity and authority. When speakers consistently link narratives to informed insights, structured reasoning, and observable outcomes, listeners begin to associate stories with expertise. This creates a perception of intelligence that is natural, sustainable, and robust. Finally, storytelling cultivates mental agility. Constructing narratives requires organizing events, reasoning through sequences, and anticipating listener interpretation. This mental practice reinforces internal discipline, clarity of thought, and precision in language. In this way, storytelling is both a communicative tool and a cognitive exercise that strengthens the speaker's overall skill. As this chapter demonstrates, storytelling is not ornamental. It is strategic, functional, and precise. Intelligent speakers use narrative to illuminate ideas, enhance retention, and reinforce authority. Stories transform abstract reasoning into accessible understanding, bridging the gap between complex thought and listener perception. Chapter 8. Navigating Challenges, Thinking and Speaking Under Pressure. The ability to communicate clearly, confidently, and persuasively in unexpected or challenging situations separates competent speakers from truly effective ones. Pressure, in this context, is any circumstance where the speaker must respond quickly, accurately, and convincingly while managing internal and external demands. It may arise in formal presentations, high-stakes meetings, interviews, debates, or even casual conversations with social or professional implications. Speaking smart under these conditions requires mental discipline, emotional regulation, and deliberate strategy. The first principle of responding under pressure is mental preparation. While one cannot anticipate every scenario, training the mind to organize thoughts quickly and to prioritize relevance allows a speaker to respond effectively. Mental preparation involves internalizing core principles, clarity, brevity, precision, and alignment with purpose. These principles serve as anchors when situational stress threatens cognitive and verbal clarity. Pressure often triggers automatic reactions, defensive reasoning, excessive verbosity, or abrupt statements. These reactions are natural but can undermine credibility. The intelligent speaker observes these impulses without surrendering to them. Awareness alone reduces their disruptive power, creating space for deliberate thought and measured response. This is the foundation of composure under stress. Internal structuring of responses is essential. Even when a reply must be immediate, the mind can perform rapid triage, identify the key question, determine the primary point to communicate, and construct a sentence framework that balances clarity and conciseness. These steps may occur in milliseconds, but they dramatically influence how the speaker is perceived. Structured thought underpins articulate speech, even when time is limited. Equally critical is emotional regulation. High-pressure situations trigger stress, which manifests physically and vocally. Anxiety increases speech rate, pitch, and filler words. Frustration encourages interruption or aggression. Excitement may produce tangents. Intelligent speakers recognize these physical and emotional cues, using breath control, micro-pauses, and intentional pacing to stabilize delivery. Emotional regulation does not eliminate feeling, it channels it to support rather than disrupt communication. Listening under pressure is as important as speaking. In moments of challenge, many speakers focus exclusively on response, losing comprehension. Missing critical nuances or misinterpreting intent can lead to ineffective or even counterproductive statements. The intelligent speaker remains attuned, passing essential information while preparing a strategic response. Active listening under stress demonstrates control and enhances credibility. Another essential skill is selective speech. High-pressure situations often stimulate the impulse to over-explain or over-justify. Excessive verbalization signals insecurity and reduces impact. Intelligent speakers prioritize the most relevant information, providing precise responses that address the core of the question or situation. Brevity is strategic, not evasive. A concise, well-framed answer carries authority. Strategic pausing is a powerful tool under pressure. A brief pause before responding serves multiple functions. It signals thoughtfulness, allows cognitive organization, and reduces the influence of emotional reaction. Many listeners unconsciously interpret measured silence as evidence of intelligence. Conversely, immediate, unconsidered responses may appear reactive, even when accurate. Adapting to unexpected content is another key component. Challenging questions may involve unfamiliar topics, ambiguous intent, or confrontational framing. The intelligent speaker remains calm and analytical. When necessary, clarifying questions are used to refine understanding before responding. This approach prevents miscommunication and demonstrates discernment. Maintaining alignment between verbal and non-verbal communication is critical under stress. Facial expressions, gestures, posture, and tone collectively influence perception. Nervous habits such as fidgeting, vocal pitch shifts, or repetitive hand movements can undermine the message. Controlled, purposeful, non-verbal behavior reinforces verbal clarity, enhancing perceived intelligence and authority. When knowledge gaps emerge, intelligent speakers employ a combination of honesty, framing, and solution-oriented response. Admitting uncertainty is not a sign of weakness when handled strategically. Phrasing such as, based on current information, my best understanding is, or I will confirm the details to ensure accuracy, conveys competence while maintaining credibility. Attempting to bluff under pressure often backfires, eroding trust. Anticipating potential challenges is a proactive strategy. Speakers who routinely evaluate likely objections, questions, or counterpoints in advance develop agility. This preparation reduces cognitive load during actual pressure situations, allowing responses to be deliberate rather than reactive. Anticipation does not require exhaustive memorization. It requires structured mental rehearsal of key principles and patterns of reasoning. Another important principle is adaptability of language and tone. In high-pressure scenarios, audience composition and emotional climate can vary widely. Skilled speakers adjust vocabulary, emphasis, and tone dynamically to maintain clarity and authority. Overly casual language in a formal setting diminishes credibility, while excessively technical language in an unfamiliar audience may confuse. Adaptability ensures accessibility without sacrificing precision. Framing is a critical tool for influence and authority. How a statement is introduced shapes listener perception. Strategic framing positions the response within logical context, highlighting relevance and minimizing misinterpretation. For example, beginning with "The most important consideration here is" immediately directs attention to priority, enhancing the impact of the response. Cognitive resilience is also essential. Pressure often induces mental fatigue, leading to errors, repetition, or tangential responses. Intelligent speakers build resilience through practice, rehearsal, and cognitive conditioning. Repeated exposure to challenging dialogue strengthens mental agility, allowing accurate thought processing even under stress. Self-monitoring is another layer of strategic communication. Skilled speakers continuously evaluate the effectiveness of their delivery, adjusting pacing, emphasis, and clarity in real time. This meta-awareness prevents minor lapses from escalating and ensures consistent perception of competence. Strategic humor or light commentary may be employed sparingly, even under pressure. When used appropriately, it can reduce tension, reinforce connection, and enhance engagement. However, overuse or inappropriate humor diminishes authority. Intelligent speakers are selective, using levity only when it supports clarity and rapport. Intelligent communication under pressure also involves managing the perception of confidence. Confidence is not loudness or dominance, it is composure, clarity, and decisiveness. Even when uncertain, the disciplined application of these principles conveys reliability. Listeners respond to controlled delivery, measured language, and thoughtful articulation more than to mere certainty. Finally, reflection after pressure situations consolidates learning. Reviewing responses, listener reactions, and personal performance identifies patterns, strengths, and areas for improvement. This reflection is essential for continuous growth, turning each challenging interaction into an opportunity to strengthen both internal discipline and external delivery. Mastering high-pressure communication completes the integration of skills discussed in earlier chapters. Internal organization, precise vocabulary, controlled voice, active listening, and adaptive storytelling coalesce under stress to produce intelligent, authoritative, and credible speech. The ability to respond under pressure is the ultimate test of speaking smart. It requires internal discipline, deliberate practice, and strategic thinking. Those who cultivate these skills transform challenging situations into opportunities for influence, insight, and credibility. Listeners consistently recognize intelligence not through content alone, but through composure, clarity, and the structured application of skill when it matters most. Chapter 9. The Art of Persuasion, Guiding Thought Without Force. Speaking smart is incomplete without understanding the subtle power of persuasion. Persuasion is not coercion. It is the ability to guide thought, influence perception, and inspire action while maintaining integrity, clarity, and credibility. It is the skill of structuring communication so that listeners align with your reasoning naturally without feeling manipulated or pressured. Persuasion is as much about understanding the human mind as it is about mastering language, tone, and structure. The foundation of persuasive communication is credibility. A speaker perceived as knowledgeable, consistent, and trustworthy exerts influence even before a single argument is presented. Credibility is built over time through accurate, precise, and reliable communication. Repetition of clear, informed, and consistent speech creates a pattern that signals authority. Listeners are more receptive when they trust the speaker's competence and honesty. Equally important is understanding the audience. Persuasion is not a one-size-fits-all endeavor. Different listeners prioritize different values, interpret messages through diverse frames, and respond to varied emotional cues. Intelligent speakers analyze these dimensions and tailor their communication accordingly. This requires observation, empathy, and anticipation of cognitive and emotional responses. Clarity and simplicity are essential in persuasive speech. Complexity may impress superficially, but it often obscures meaning and diminishes influence. Ideas must be structured logically, articulated precisely, and presented in ways that allow listeners to follow effortlessly. A compelling argument is comprehensible. If the audience struggles to understand, persuasion fails regardless of the speaker's intelligence. Strategic sequencing of information enhances persuasiveness. Begin with context, establish relevance, present evidence, and conclude with the key takeaway. This order mirrors cognitive processing, enabling listeners to assimilate information naturally. When sequence is ignored, even strong evidence may be lost amidst confusion. Sequencing is not arbitrary, it is the architecture of influence. Another core principle is evidence-based argumentation. Persuasion is grounded in facts, reasoning, and observable outcomes. Anecdotes, analogies, and narratives support, but do not replace, empirical or logical foundations. Intelligent speakers integrate evidence with narrative strategically, enhancing understanding while reinforcing credibility. Unsupported assertions, no matter how eloquently delivered, erode influence over time. The emotional dimension of persuasion is equally critical. Human decision-making is influenced as much by feeling as by logic. Skilled communicators leverage emotional resonance to highlight significance, underscore consequences, and inspire motivation. Emotional appeal must align with truth and relevance. Excessive dramatization or manipulation undermines trust and credibility. Measured emotion enhances engagement, allowing ideas to resonate without compromising integrity. Language choice in persuasive speech is particularly important. Words convey nuance, shape perception, and frame argument. The use of precise, active, and positive language strengthens influence. Words that imply certainty, competence, and ethical consideration are more persuasive than neutral or tentative phrasing. Similarly, avoiding negative framing, overgeneralization, and absolutes prevents defensive reactions in the audience. Framing arguments strategically is another powerful tool. Presenting ideas in ways that highlight benefits, solutions, or relevance enhances receptivity. Cognitive framing directs attention and shapes interpretation without imposing force. For example, emphasizing how a proposed approach resolves a problem rather than criticizing existing methods focuses the audience on positive outcomes and reduces resistance. Analogies and comparisons facilitate understanding of abstract or complex concepts. Well-chosen analogies translate unfamiliar ideas into familiar terms, creating intuitive comprehension. However, analogies must be accurate and relevant. Inappropriate or stretched comparisons can confuse and weaken credibility. Intelligent speakers integrate analogies selectively and purposefully to strengthen the argument. Active listening remains central to persuasive speech. Understanding audience reactions allows the speaker to adjust approach in real time. Observing verbal and non-verbal cues, questions, tone, body language provides feedback that informs pacing, emphasis, and content. Skilled speakers pivot based on these signals, ensuring the message is received effectively without compromising clarity or authority. Repetition and emphasis are tools of persuasion when applied judiciously. Highlighting key points, summarizing conclusions, and reinforcing critical arguments ensure retention. Overuse, however, dilutes impact. Persuasive speakers calibrate repetition, focusing attention without appearing redundant or patronizing. Handling objections is a crucial skill. Anticipating counterarguments and addressing them preemptively demonstrates foresight, competence, and integrity. Persuasive speakers acknowledge valid concerns, provide reasoned responses, and integrate objections into the broader argument. This approach reduces resistance and enhances credibility. Ignoring or dismissing objections, conversely, diminishes influence. Confidence in delivery underpins persuasive effectiveness. Confidence signals mastery, reduces doubt, and instills trust. However, confidence must be grounded in knowledge and preparation. Overconfidence or arrogance, especially when unsupported by evidence, triggers skepticism. Authenticity and composure are hallmarks of persuasive intelligence. The interplay between verbal and non-verbal communication is essential in persuasion. Tone, pace, gesture, posture, and eye contact collectively reinforce or undermine verbal argument. Skilled communicators ensure alignment, creating coherence between message and delivery. Discrepancy between words and body language erodes trust, while alignment enhances it. Strategic questioning is another dimension of persuasion. Asking questions encourages reflection, guides thought, and fosters engagement. Questions can expose assumptions, clarify needs, or direct attention to overlooked factors. Intelligent speakers employ questions to facilitate understanding and lead listeners toward insight rather than issuing directives. Storytelling within persuasive contexts amplifies influence. Stories illustrate consequences, demonstrate processes, and humanize abstract concepts. Persuasive stories are concise, relevant, and directly linked to the core argument. They provide cognitive anchors that enhance comprehension, retention, and motivation. Adaptability remains central. Persuasion is dynamic, requiring continuous assessment and adjustment. Skilled communicators modify argument structure, emphasis, and delivery based on audience response. They maintain core integrity while optimizing reception, ensuring that communication remains effective under varying conditions. Ethical persuasion distinguishes intelligent communication from manipulation. Ethical speakers respect autonomy, present information accurately, and avoid coercion. Influence emerges from clarity, insight, and credibility rather than pressure or deception. Sustained influence depends on trust. Once credibility is compromised, persuasion diminishes rapidly. Reflection and iterative improvement strengthen persuasive skill over time. Analyzing past interactions, identifying strengths and weaknesses, and rehearsing responses to likely scenarios builds both confidence and competence. Persuasion is not innate, it is cultivated through conscious practice and disciplined refinement. Intelligent persuasion synthesizes all previously discussed elements: internal clarity, precise language, controlled voice, structured delivery, effective storytelling, and resilience under pressure. It is the apex of communicative skill because it simultaneously demonstrates understanding, articulates reasoning, and inspires alignment without compromising integrity. Mastery of persuasion does not rely on dominance, volume, or manipulation. It relies on anticipation, clarity, precision, empathy, and adaptability. Listeners are persuaded not simply by what is said, but by how ideas are presented, structured, and reinforced. The speaker becomes a guide rather than a lecturer, a facilitator of understanding rather than an enforcer of belief. Chapter 10: Sustaining Influence, Authority, Presence, and the Long-Term Impact of Speaking. Smart mastering speech is only part of intelligent communication. Equally important is sustaining influence across extended interactions. Whether leading a meeting, moderating a discussion, or engaging in prolonged dialogue, consistent clarity, authority, and engagement determine whether a speaker's ideas resonate and endure. Speaking smart over time is not merely about individual sentences or moments of brilliance. It is about maintaining structural, vocal, and cognitive alignment across entire conversations and interactions. The foundation of sustained influence is consistency. Listeners build mental models of speakers based on repeated interactions. Consistency in vocabulary, reasoning, tone, and delivery reinforces credibility and trust. In contrast, variability that appears arbitrary or unpredictable diminishes authority, even if individual statements are precise. Intelligent communicators understand that reliability in speech creates a stable platform upon which influence grows. Presence, both mental and physical, plays a crucial role. Mental presence involves complete attentiveness to the conversation, anticipating developments and adapting in real time. Physical presence is conveyed through posture, gestures, facial expressions, and controlled eye contact. Together, these elements communicate engagement and investment, signaling to listeners that ideas matter and that the speaker's insights deserve attention. Maintaining engagement in extended discourse requires variation without loss of clarity. Skilled speakers modulate pacing, volume, and emphasis to highlight important points while sustaining attention. Monotony, even with precise language and credible reasoning, erodes listener focus. Variation must be purposeful, supporting comprehension and emphasizing key messages rather than distracting from them. Strategic recapitulation reinforces understanding. Summarizing prior points at appropriate intervals helps listeners integrate complex information. Repetition of key terms, phrases, or ideas, used judiciously, anchors comprehension without becoming redundant. Intelligent communicators balance reinforcement with forward movement, ensuring that speech remains progressive rather than stagnant. Anticipating listener fatigue is another critical consideration. Even highly interested audiences require cognitive pauses. Strategic silence, brief reflection, or interactive elements such as questions or illustrative anecdotes sustain engagement. Fatigue management is not merely about comfort. It ensures that intellectual energy is allocated efficiently, maximizing absorption and retention. Long-term authority depends on aligning content with principle. Speakers who consistently model accuracy, honesty, and analytical rigor cultivate lasting credibility. Temporary displays of brilliance are insufficient. Sustained intelligence emerges from patterns of clarity, composure, and reliability. The perceptual architecture of authority is built over multiple interactions rather than single moments. Adaptability over extended interaction remains essential. Complex conversations, meetings, or discussions inevitably introduce unanticipated developments, objections, or shifts in focus. Intelligent speakers remain flexible, adjusting tone, emphasis, structure, and even narrative to maintain clarity and alignment with overarching objectives. Rigidity under dynamic conditions undermines authority. Integration of story, evidence, and analysis is particularly impactful in sustained discourse. Stories illuminate, evidence validates, and analysis contextualizes. Intelligent speakers balance these components, ensuring that narrative reinforces argument, data supports reasoning, and analytical commentary ties both together. This multidimensional approach creates a cohesive and compelling communication framework. Finally, reflection and self-assessment after extended interactions ensure continuous improvement. Reviewing performance, noting areas for enhancement, and refining approach strengthens long-term effectiveness. Speaking smart is not static. It evolves through conscious practice, observation, and adaptation, producing speakers who are resilient, influential, and consistently credible across diverse contexts. It is demonstrated not only in isolated statements but across dynamic and extended interactions. Authority arises from clarity, consistency, and composure rather than volume or theatrics. Influence is achieved through alignment of thought, speech, and delivery, reinforced by observation, reflection, and deliberate practice. Intelligent speakers understand their audience, anticipate challenges, and guide understanding ethically and effectively. Confidence is rooted in preparation, adaptability, and honesty. Engagement is sustained through purposeful variation, narrative, and timing. Ultimately, speaking smart is a skill cultivated over time, transforming communication into a tool for clarity, credibility, and lasting impact.